Mom would say, don't stoop to their level. Dad would say, punch him. Mom was a sage of wit and wisdom. She inspired her family, and she had a remarkable sense of humor. I'll miss her limericks and rhymes. She was a human archive of literature, poetry, and prose. Mom spoke often of her childhood and all the struggles that she and her family lived through during the Great Depression. So as children, we were raised to appreciate what we had, conserve water, electricity, and we were always upcycling items as a common practice. Our mother, she shopped the Jewel Tea Man, local Avon lady, she saved green stamps, scheduled the iced milk from the milkman. We always seemed to have one old car. Mom made it work. She said, as long as we had each other, that's all we ever needed. And Mom was always there to comfort us, keep us engaged, encouraged us to read and to be creative. But she never smothered us because she wanted us to be independent. Mom told us that we were special and always held us close. She taught us to share, forgive, and show empathy. She was our Easter Bunny tooth fairy and made all of our birthday cakes and the occasional pie. In spring, we rode our bikes all day. We drank water from the garden hose, collected soda bottles, walked on the railroad tracks, played with our friends till supper time, and ate dinner at the table with each other every evening because Mom wouldn't have had it any other way. Mom was occasionally melancholy at times. She lived with a sort of sadness after the loss of her twin brother Gene, and she missed him every day. She liked a particular poem, and she made me promise that I would read this poem at her eulogy. The poem is Crossing the Barbite of Lord Tennyson. And now I will read the poem. Sunset and evening star, and one clear call to me. And may there be no moaning at the harp when I put out to sea. But such a tide as music seems asleep, too full of sound of home, when that which drew out from fountains deep turns again home. Twilight and evening bell, and after that the dark. And may there be no sadness of farewell when I embark. For from our bourne of time and place, the flood may bear thee far. I hope to see my pilot's face when I cross the bar. So in closing, Mom was indeed our female protagonist of our family. And one day, she was called to the sunset, crossed that bar without fear, and was carried away. She was not sad. She was holding the hand of God. And next, Dr. Katz is going to say a few things about that.
Robert Dale Rosendahl, born April 20, 1921, Thief River Falls, enlisted in the 3rd Division, 4th Infantry, July 14, 1939, in Fort Lincoln, Nebraska. Transferred to the Philippines in December and was assigned to the 3rd Pursuit Squadron in the Philippines with the rank of Sergeant Aircraft Mechanic First Class. He was at Iba Airfield on the east coast of Luzon in the Philippines, which was bombed on December the 8th, which is actually December the 7th. He was wounded with shrapnel and earned his first Purple Heart. With the airfield destroyed, Bob became an infantryman, fought on the peninsula of Bataan, notably involved in the Battle of the Points, which was a Japanese invasion. Here he received his second Purple Heart. He was surrendered on April 9th and made the death march of Bataan. 75,000 troops started that 65-mile march. 900 Americans and 15,000 Philippine troops died. Following the march, he was interned at Cabanatuan prison camp, suffering along with all of his fellow prisoners from lack of food, water, and medical care. The Japanese captors were severely cruel and inhumane. He was eventually shipped to Manchuria on the Japanese hell ship, the Toru Maru, in October of 1942. That ship was actually attacked by a submarine. Fortunately, it was a dud, and the ship was not sunk. He survived 3 winters in the camp in Mukden with similar conditions that he experienced in the Philippines, except it was also very, very, very cold. He was liberated by the Russians in August of 1945, having spent 1,232 days as a prisoner of war. He was evacuated from Manchuria by ship, That ship ran into a typhoon, it almost was sunk. It then hit a mine and had to be towed into harbor, but he survived. He returned to the United States in November of 45, married Betty in August of 46, and spent 2 years in Argentina as a meat inspector of beef that was being shipped to Europe under the Marshall Plan. He separated from the Army in May of 1950, but then almost immediately enlisted when the Korean War broke out in August of 1950. He served as a first sergeant in the 3rd Infantry Division. Notably, his division covered the retreating 1st Marine Division at the Chosin Reservoir battlefield in December of 1950. Following his tour in Korea, he was stationed at Arlington Cemetery in Washington. Bob was discharged from the Army November 4th, 1953, having served 14 years and 24 days. He then served 20 years in the Department of Justice and retired in 1977. His military decorations include 2 Purple Hearts, 2 Bronze Stars, and a multitude of service medals that include but are not limited to the Defense of the Philippines, Liberation of the Philippines, the Korean Service Medal, the American Defense Service Medal, the Victory Medal of World War II, United Nations Medal, Republic of Korea Service Medal, 4 Presidential Unit Citations, the Korean Presidential Unit Citation, and the Philippine Presidential Unit Citation. When Bob served in the Philippines and in Korea, the Supreme Commander was Douglas MacArthur. It is fitting that I review MacArthur's parting words to the United States Senate delivered April 19, 1951. Old soldiers never die. They just fade away. And like all old soldiers, I think Bob Rosendahl will never die. He will just fade away. An old soldier who tried to do his duty for his country, as God gave him the light to see that duty. A true patriot.
Military honors. There will be 3 volleys of fire. After the volleys of fire, taps will be sounded. At the time the taps are sounded, I ask that all veterans render a salute, and all others I ask that you place your hand over your heart out of respect. Following taps, the United States Army will fold the flag and present that to you, men. We get you folks to please stand for the volleys and taps.
flag is presented on behalf of the President of the United States, the United States Army, and on behalf of a grateful nation as a token of our appreciation for the honorable and faithful service rendered by your loved one.
John, his loyalty and his respect that he had for his country and flag, and his property, his friend.
Sit by me.
Okay, so everybody in this room has heard my morning delivery, so this is a little different, and it's, but I hope you find interesting. First of all, I think most everybody here knows how I met Martha, and it was through Bob Rosendahl. So, when Kathleen was getting married the first time, this is 32 years ago, because her sister, who is now deceased, knew that I was interested in the Second World War, said, would you like, and I was a widower, I said, would you like to come to the wedding to meet my dad? And I did. And the first person I met after Dad was Kate.
Okay,
Kate. Here's Kate. Oh, and Kate spilled something on her dress, and then I met Martha, and Martha kind of hit on me. But it was okay. It was a soft hit. And she lived in Tulsa, and I had no idea if I'd ever meet her again. But then, that was in August, right? August? August.
July 28th, something like that.
July 28th. The first marriage. She's now remarried to this guy who carries 2 knives, the Mexican.
The Mexican.
Anyway, not to be stupid about this, but anyway, so in the fall, we had to have a party to celebrate one of our folks. They were gonna have a baby. And then after that party, we said, let's have a black tie dinner, and I needed a date. So I called and I asked Martha's sister, can I come? She said yes. And so I met Martha, and then we got married 6 months later. That's how it all happened. So, now, some of this is serious, some of it's sad. We are the battling bastards of Bataan. No mama, no papa, no Uncle Sam. No aunts, no uncles, no cousins, no nieces. No rifles, no guns, no planes, no artillery pieces. And no one gives a damn. That was the poem that they said amongst themselves in that place. Of interest, the day that the people on Bataan surrendered was April 9th. It's the same date that Lee surrendered to Grant in Appomattox in 1865, the same date, April 9th. And Bob always said, I didn't surrender, they surrendered me, and that's true. And a lot of the men felt that maybe they could have survived longer than the 3 months they fought on that peninsula, but in any event, they surrendered. On April 9th, 1942, in the death march of Bataan, there were 70,000 prisoners. 54,000 survived. 900 Americans and 15,000 Filipinos died on that march. So it was a very brutal, very ugly thing. He was a prisoner during that time for 1,300 and some odd days, as I told you this afternoon. And it was only better when they got to Mukden, because Mukden had more food, but it was very, very cold. But the Japanese had taken them there, so they were supposed to do repairs on machine equipment. Mitsubishi actually had contracted with the Japanese government to pay for these guys to go up there. And when there were still POWs in the Philippines, they had to fill out a card to say, what is your skill set? And they picked out all the mechanics and put them on a ship and sent them up to Manchuria. So they were there for 3 winters. Of note, they never produced anything of any value. The Japanese did not understand what they were doing, so they were taking these pieces of machine equipment out of crates, and they would pour concrete to put the machine equipment on, and as they poured the equipment, they'd take pieces out of the gear here, and the lever here, and this here, and throw it in the concrete. So it was buried, and they could never put anything together. They never, in all that time there, they never produced anything for the Japanese. That was really sort of their code of privilege, and they were proud of that they were hiding everything. But he was a prisoner for 1,232 days. The other interesting story was when he came to Korea as a POW on that death ship. He landed in Busan. Busan was famous during the Korean War because that was where the early perimeter was. Later, when he went back to Korea, and he fought with the 3rd Division, and they protected the retreat of the 1st Marine Division out of the North Korea. They got on ships and they came back to Busan. And he remembered that when he got off that ship, the narrow gauge railroad that sat there was the same one that he got on when he was a prisoner of war in 1942 that took him up to Manchuria. Interesting thing. Sad thing, 16 million Americans fought in the Second World War. 407,000 died or were missing in action and never found because they disappeared, so they didn't know how to list them as killed, KIA, or missing in action, but there were 400,000. 670,000 were wounded. There were 130,000 POWs in Europe. Most were the guys who flew the B-17s that bombed Germany and got shot down. A big number were from the Battle of the Bulge. The death rate in a German POW camp was 1%. The death rate in the 350,000 American POWs under the Japanese rule was 40% of those people died, either early on when they were captured or during their captivity. We know that 12,935 Americans died under the care of the Japanese. And at the end of the war, the standing order was the Japanese were going to kill all the POWs. And Bob knew that was going to happen. He told me they gave us a couple of potatoes, and they said, we're going to march out of camp going someplace. And he said, I know they're going to kill us. Anyway, the people came in, the Russians, and then some paratroopers came in from what is now the Secret Service, came in, said the war's over, and they were not killed. Comments about Bettie. Bettie was a heroine. You know, think about this. They met roughly 1 year after he came out of at 95 pounds when he was released as a POW. He said he gained 90 pounds in 90 days. I don't think that actually happened. But he was told he would be chronically ill forever because he had so many different diseases. You could never have kids. He met Bettie, a blind date, and they were married within 30 days. And then they had 6 kids. So that really didn't work. When they came back from Argentina, they had a fire on their ship, and everything they owned in Argentina was destroyed. So when they landed back in America, they had nothing. He resigns from the military in May, and in July, the Korean War starts. He said, wait a minute, I can't let those little green troops who knew nothing about war, because they had decommissioned. All these guys that fought during the Second War had all been decommissioned. He says, I have to go back because they need my guidance. And that's why he went back in. But he left Bettie with 2 young children. He says, I have to go back. I don't know if she liked it or not, but she probably said, but anyway, he did it. and she accepted that. Betty's twin brother died during the war from rheumatic heart disease, and he was a big, strapping guy, but he failed the physical, and he was very sad about that because he looked so healthy. But he died because he had rheumatic heart disease, and it was her twin brother. Her other brother went to the South Pacific and survived the war. As Kathleen talked about today, she loved books, poetry. She loved baseball, which was her passion. In fact, baseball saved her from dying 2 years ago. When we thought she was going to die, she said, "Wait a minute, it's baseball season. I decided I don't." The other interesting fact that maybe no one here knows is when she was, during the war, she worked on an assembly plant in St. Louis as a final inspector on proximity fuses, which was a super secret fuse that would put in shells that would cause the shell to explode as it approached a certain distance from an object that it was aimed at. They were so secret that they only used them in the South Pacific for the longest time because they didn't want the Germans to find one and then re-engineer it for them to have it for themselves. The first time they were used in Europe was in the Battle of the Bulge. And even Patton said, "This is the best killing machine we ever had." True story.
Thanks to Mom.
Yeah.
Eagle Eye Mom.
Okay,
Thanks, Mom.
the greatest generation. What do you think? So World War II's generation, their perseverance through those difficult times is a testament to their extraordinary character. They all came out of the Depression, and that's probably why we were able to do what we were able to do during the Second World War, is the men and women who fought in that war had lived, a decade of difficulty. So getting into difficult times was not that hard for them. It was their actions were remarkable during the time of war and ultimately made the United States a better place to live. Born and raised in a tumultuous era marked by war, economic depression, these men and women developed values of personal responsibility, duty, honor, and faith. These characteristics helped them win the war, build the American economy, and make advances in science and in visionary programs such as Medicare. Despite their achievements, the greatest generation remains remarkably humble about what they've done. And Bob never talked about what he did as being anything extraordinary. It was just what we had to do. It's a generation that by and large made no demands of any homage from us, and said that the prosperity, the prosperous economic and political changes that occurred was because of their sacrifices. They never said, "You owe us." They just did it. I want to read something you've heard before as it applies to this generation, if I can. The world will little note, say again. The world will little note, nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work, which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead, we should take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave their last full measure of devotion. That we here highly resolve that these dead should not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and the government of the people, by the people, and for the people, shall not perish from the earth. Said by Lincoln, Gettysburg Address. Thanks everybody for coming. Now we have dessert.
Those of you that don't know me, my name is Barbara, and Kathleen and I have been friends since kindergarten. And when she asked me to come and help take care of Bob and Betty, I was honored because I got to see all the love that they shared, and it really touched my heart. And earlier, Kathleen had talked about her mom's limericks and stories and stuff, and I've written them all down, and I'm trying to put them together in a book. And this is one that she repeated to me on several occasions, so I thought that it would be good to tell you now. It says, Johnny Rebick, how could you be so mean? I told you you'd be sorry for inventing that machine. For all the neighbors' cats and dogs will never more be seen, 'cause they're all ground into sausage in Johnny Rebick's machine. One day, the machine was broken. The darn thing wouldn't go, so Johnny Rebick crawled inside to see what made it so. His wife was having nightmares, and while walking in her sleep, she gave the crank an awful yank, and Johnny Rebick was meat. Oh, Mr. Johnny, how could you be so mean? We told you you'd be sorry for inventing that machine. Yeah, she just, I was so honored to be able to spend time that last year with both of them. It's amazing. Amazing.